Hey, you're welcome. That's absolutely bustling in here. Welcome, welcome. I knew it was going to do that. I had a feeling it was going to change the panel.
Hi, Andy.
Hey, you alright?
Good end.
Good. What do I want? That one? Yeah, that'll do. Still see the comments that way. Hey, welcome. Yeah, we will eventually get to the 60s.
I don't believe you.
I think by the sounds of it, we'll be there next week. If Ronnie's not going to be around, it makes sense, I suppose. We'll finally get through the 60s stuff next week. Because the 60s is a bit of a weird, just while we're waiting for Ronnie to come on, I suppose, it's a bit of a weird era because there is that like 4.5 to 5 year period where the definition does change slightly and it is a bit wishy-washy and it becomes very spiritual, and you've got like Vera Older and a couple of others that have got quite a lot of say within the society, but it doesn't last very long and then it kind of gets back to basics again. And a huge part of that, is down to Eva Batt, even though she was irrelevant. So, good job, really.
Speaking of the 60s, I was out on me bike before, and there's a little corner of the park where people who have died can have like plaques put on the like a plant pot type thing.
Yeah.
And one was called Eamon's Corner, but it's kind of spelt differently to. Do you know the band Eamon Corner, Andy?
No.
Yeah, well, their big hit was 1969, and it was called Paradise is Half as Nice.
Right.
Does that ring a bell?
No, I don't even know the song.
All right.
I might do if I heard it, but I don't know it from the title.
Yeah, well, that would entail me having to sing it, which would probably put everybody off watching, I would think. But the lyrics have always fascinated me because it starts by saying, if paradise was half as nice as heaven that you take me to, who needs paradise? I'd rather have you, right? And I've always thought that doesn't make any sense.
No, I was trying to work out, there's not really a connotation there.
No, because it means
as
that,
nice as the heaven that you take me to.
Yeah.
Right, well, you would. I mean, but you haven't said that they're heaven. You said that they take you there, so it's kind of like that's a destination.
No, it's kind of like he's talking to his partner or girlfriend or, that, and so, but it would make sense if it said if paradise was twice as nice, not half as nice.
Yeah, because you're trying to make the fact that heaven is better, right? So, yeah.
Who needs paradise?
I bet you Ronnie's making a cup of tea.
Yeah. I suppose he is.
Well, I suppose just whilst we're waiting, I guess the main reason that we're talking about the RSPCA yet again is because all the attention is on the RSPCA yet again. For anyone who hasn't kind of been following it, there was an open letter kind of put forward by, as the newspaper and the journalists described them, the leading animal welfare groups. And I don't know whether they were offended by that or not. I definitely would be. However, this potentially kind of called the RSPCA essentially hypocrites and kind of questioned what they were doing with their assurance scheme and kind of asked for them to end it, essentially. And then the RSPCA have, last week, responded without going into it too much before Ronnie gets here. I don't think that what they've said in reply is anything that can really be criticised. It's all stuff that we've been saying for a while.
No, I think we ought to say at the beginning that we're not fans of the RSPCA.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that was fairly obvious because, as kind of like ethical vegans, why would be? I mean, there's some level of what they do that you can kind of admire them for to some degree, in the same way that I've got admiration for dog and cat rescues, but also there's a huge level of hypocrisy and speciesism there, which also needs to be challenged. So I would look at them in the same breath as that, personally.
So no Ron.
We don't know where Ronnie is, in fact. We don't know. I'm assuming that he's making a cup of tea, because that's usually why he's late, but I don't actually know.
I wonder if he's forgotten to turn the kettle on.
Yeah, I mean, he was around a couple of hours ago, and he was all for the subject of tonight, so yeah, I'm assuming he'll be here in a minute.
Well, you should speculate that he's gone to sleep, because as soon as you did that the other week, he came on, didn't you?
Do you think he would have gone to sleep? I don't know. He might be having a nap, I suppose, and overslept. He might have thought he can squeeze one in. It's usually, though, normally when he's late, it's usually something to do with the kettle.
Louise has probably put him to sleep.
But I suppose, just whilst we're waiting, we might as well just sort of get into some of it, I suppose. Otherwise we'll just kind of fill in there. But yeah, so for anyone that wasn't kind of aware, the campaign that this open letter to the RSPCA has been kind of dubbed under is called For Charlie. It's all kind of centred around a pig that they've obviously named Charlie. And so if you want to read the letter for yourself, the website is forcharlie.love. That's like the full URL. And you can read the letter in kind of full there. But I mean, most of the letter, I think it's about 11 pages or something, but something like 8 pages of that are just names. The letter itself is there's not a lot to it. In fact, I could read it.
Oh, you mean the new welfarist letter?
Yeah. I mean, the actual letter is only like 1.5 pages, and then the rest of it is just a list of signed bys.
It's funny, the RSPCA have kind of replied saying our response to the open letter without any reference to what it was or anything. So it looks like they're not that keen on people finding it, presumably.
Yeah, that is an interesting point, actually. Yeah, they haven't linked the letter, have they, so that people can read it if they're not aware?
And not even said what the open letter was about.
No, not actually, like, even sort of like taking it piece by piece.
No, they just launches the RSPCA exists solely to improve the lives of all animals.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose from their perspective, for all we know, maybe they've had other criticism. Well, I'd imagine they have probably had other criticisms from other directions, and so their open letter might be a response to all of this, as opposed to just that single letter. Oh yeah, so the website to read it is For Charlie, and that's spelled FORCHARLIE.love. I'll type it. And then it's literally one of the first things that'll come up is like a video that you can see Charlie, and then underneath you've got 2 options: read the letter and take action. So
forcharlie.love.
Forcharlie.love, yeah, they utilised the .love their name.
Great.
Yeah, I thought you'd like that. Yeah, this is, and for anyone who doesn't know, this is kind of all being fronted and run more or less by Animal Rising. I know there's a couple of other groups involved too, but the campaign For Charlie is a kind of an Animal Rising campaign. Here's Ronnie. Because it even says on the logo, which obviously language-wise we'll always be a fan of, it says stand for Charlie, not cruelty, which is another opportunity missed. How long did it take to make a cup of tea?
Well, it wasn't a cup of tea, it was my computer. I was trying to, because I haven't got I normally do it on my iPad, and I haven't got that this evening. So I thought I'd do it on the computer, and I just couldn't get in. I just couldn't find anywhere on the computer to join the live.
Yeah, I've never actually joined a live on my computer, you know.
No,
I know I can listen to them. I've listened to them quite a few times, but yeah, I've never actually joined one.
No, I couldn't find anywhere. It hasn't got the same.
I'm not actually sure that you can. You know.
No, maybe you can't.
Well, you have done, so you can.
No, I'm
on my phone, but because the phone's little and all that, I thought I'd try the computer. but obviously it don't work, so I'm on my phone now. It's all right. I'm here anyway.
Yes, you're here.
Trying to borrow your computer.
Well, yeah. I mean, you haven't missed too much. We was just kind of sort of setting the stage, I suppose, and talking about the fact that there's obviously was the open letter that was written by the new welfareists to the RSPCA, and then obviously there's been the reply from the RSPCA, and just talking about the For Charlie campaign that's been launched.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, I've got a multitude of thoughts about the whole thing.
A multitude. Well, there you go. Hey, Ronnie, before we go on, do you remember it's kind of bubblegum pop band called Amen Corner?
Amen Corner, yes, I do vaguely.
Oh, yeah. All right, good. That's
Very
all.
vaguely. I can't remember any of their songs, but I remember the name.
If Paradise was
like
half as nice.
Oh, yes, was that one of theirs? Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
What were they? Were they like a 60s band? Were they 60s into the 70s?
Yeah, that was
like
69, that was.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's right. No, I weren't very keen on. If that was one of their numbers, I don't think I'd be very keen on them. No.
No, it's very lightweight pop stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a bit like Herman's Hermits, you know, that kind of.
I remember Herman. Yeah, Herman and the Hermits. Yeah,
Yeah,
I remember.
no milk today.
Yeah, I remember him. Yeah.
Yeah, no milk today. Well, you know that one then, Andy. That's weird.
Yeah, and sadly, this is quite funny. My mum was a big fan of Herman's Hermits. And
I think you said
when
that
I was
before.
like in first school and middle school, that used to be like our before school and after school theme music that we used to listen to.
Peter Noon.
It would be it would be Herman's Hermits on the one side, and the other side was kind of like a compilation of Beatles songs that my dad had put together for her, but she wasn't keen on that, so we used to basically have Herman's Hermits, and then she'd rewind the tape, and we'd go again.
It's a hard life.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not good.
They had another song, if I remember, that was like something about standing on a corner or something along those lines. There was another one that just stuck in my head. But yeah, those were the two. No Milk Today used to be the one that I can really remember.
Yeah, they were quite big. So the RSPCA started as the SPCA in 1824, because obviously this is the 200-year thing. So 1824, Ronnie, can you remember? You must remember those days.
Yeah, how old were you then?
Oh, I was middle-aged then in those days. Yeah. Yes. Yes, a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I mentioned this earlier and kind of mentioned the fact that the RSPCA celebrated their 200th anniversary this year in January, like there was quite a lot of shock about that, and I suppose people don't really think about just how long a time that is and how many things have changed within society and everything else in 200 years. That's an enormous amount of time. And it's kind of like, well, it's reflective in the sense that, so from at least the view of being property, animals have had some sort of legal rights for not necessarily the full 200 years, but certainly a portion of that. And yet we're still exploiting more of them than ever. So this should be a great example of why changing legislation or improving legislation, as it's often labelled, doesn't actually change anything from the victim's perspective. If anything, it just kind of makes things more comfortable for the public.
Not unless you fundamentally and massively change the nature of the administration, which means you have to change the nature of the culture, doesn't it? Which means you have to tackle stupidism.
Well, yeah, what I thought was interesting about that video that you shared earlier, Roger, was the way that they were talking about like dog fighting and bull baiting. These are things that we've got rid of. And it's like, well, what's the justification for the things that continue then? Like, how did you look at those forms of animal use and say, this isn't just something we're going to tidy up, right? They didn't come in and put a stamp on bull baiting. They came in and said, this isn't okay.
I think it was just the practicality of them realising, there was a possibility, there was a realistic possibility, perhaps even a probability of being able to abolish those things. It was like a pragmatic decision, to be honest, because we can see that in more recent years with regards to greyhound racing. the RSPCA now is totally opposed to greyhound racing, to commercial greyhound racing, and they would support its abolition. Now, you go back a few years, and that wasn't the case, because they tended. It seems that they've sort of moved with public opinion on that. I mean, the League Against Cruel Sports has been exactly the same, by the way, with greyhound racing. It's only more recently that they've become totally opposed to it, rather than wanting to reform it, which was the RSPCA's position at one time as well. So I think this is what it is. It's about the practicalities of being able to get this legislation passed.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Weren't the RSPCA like quite a big component in getting like coursing banned? It just seems a bit hypocritical that they'd have one stance on one thing.
Well, the RSPCA would have supported the Hunting Act, would have supported the ban on hunting, because at one time the RSPCA weren't opposed to hunting, and the hunters used to use this in their own defence by saying, well, what we do can't be cruel because the RSPCA isn't opposed to us. I don't think the RSPCA went out promoting hunting, but they didn't have a policy against hunting.
Right.
And so that was used by
Yeah,
the
but they
hunters.
formed an alliance, didn't they? So they formed an alliance with League Against Cruel Sports and I4, which stands for the International Fund for Animal Welfare. And they formed this alliance, which was called Alliance for the Protection of Hunted Animals. And so they became the big players in the eventual ban.
Yeah, but that was only leading on from something that happened in the 1970s, which was there was a big effort to change the RSPCA policy on hunting, actually, to make the RSPCA opposed.
Well, in the 70s, Ronnie, the ban on hair coursing got through, and it got thrown out by the House of Lords, didn't it?
I think that did happen at one stage. Yes. And it may have been the 70s. I can't remember exactly, because of course hair coursing was always the blood sport, so to speak, that was the most unpopular with the public. Whenever there was public opinion polls taken on the various forms of hunting with dogs, this hair coursing always had the most people opposed to it. So I think that was why that was taken on its own at that stage. But the RSPCA, it was only through there was a group in the 1970s, the RSPCA Reform Group, which was set up to campaign and to work for a change in the RSPCA policy on hunting, so that the RSPCA became opposed to hunting, and that campaign actually succeeded. Otherwise, the RSPCA would not have been part of that alliance, to promote the Hunting Act.
Yeah, Richard Ryder says that the election of Thatcher had something to do with the hunters kind of getting a new head of steam type of thing, and said that in the 1980s then the RSPCA became ultra conservative again, which prompted them to do the reform group. And then by the time you ended up with kind of New Labour, the RSPCA were a bit more liberal. But it's all relative, I mean, like whenever we talk about, the spectrum of RSPCA militancy versus conservatism and everything, it never goes to veganism.
No, it's all within it's all within certain limitations. I mean, what happened was the policy of the RSPCA Reform Group in the 1970s. I think it was the 70s rather than the 80s. I think the change came in the late 70s with the RSPCA policy. From what I remember, a lot of the people that were how the Reform Group did it was they worked to get people elected to the RSPCA's ruling body, which was I don't know whether it's called a board or a ruling council, whatever the name was of it. They worked to get people elected to that who were opposed to hunting. And that's how and they succeeded in getting enough of those people elected, so they were able to change the policy. That was how it was done. and over a period of years, putting up candidates, and they encouraged people opposed to hunting to actually join the RSPCA, and the League Against Cruel Sports did as well. As part of all this, encouraged anti-hunt people to join the RSPCA so they could vote in these candidates to replace people who were actually not opposed to hunting. And a lot of the people that were elected to the RSPCA's ruling council were vegan.
There was a couple of SABs, weren't there?
Yeah, hunt SABs. There was, I think, people like John Bryant. He was elected. He was vegan, and a few others. But they didn't promote veganism as part of their position. The main reason they were there
was it Robin Howard or someone? The guy with the real long hair.
Yeah, I mean, Robin Howard may well have been one of them. He was vegan. I mean, Robin was involved with me in the ALF, or the precursor to the ALF, and had a suspended sentence. But that, I mean, if it's true, I can't quite remember. But I think you may well be right that Robin was one of the people that was elected to the RSPCA ruling council. And so there were all these people that there were quite a lot of vegans elected, but they didn't kind of use their influence to get the RSPCA to promote veganism. They were mainly there to get the RSPCA to oppose hunting.
Yeah, it was all single issues. I mean, there's a bit in the animal film where you see your friend of mine, Dick Corse, Richard Ryder, and all that, and there's a big row going on in a RSPCA AGM, I think.
Oh, there were huge rows because we would turn up, as hunt SABs, and you'd always know who we were because we were all kind of wearing smart suits and that, but we all had plimsolls on. You couldn't get, black plimsolls because you couldn't get sort of shoes that were, sort of what you might call vegan-friendly shoes in those days that looked like leather shoes. And so we kind of, when we looked at our feet, they could tell who we were. And there was.
I thought in those days you were barefoot, Ron.
Well, I think there were some people went around barefoot, but I don't think. I'm not sure they'd have been allowed in the RSPCA AGM barefooted.
Yeah, they've got to make sure that they wear animal skin on their feet to be allowed in.
Well, we were there in these black plimsolls, really, and we were allowed in, and there's all sorts of arguments. I think the police were called the number of the AGMs because there was there's fisticuffs between hunt supporters and anti-hunt people, and it was right, But really the AGMs didn't. I don't know what power the AGMs had to create policy because.
Stop it, Jennifer.
Do those kind of things still happen now?
No, I don't think the AGMs are like that at all now. No. There's probably I don't know how many people attend them. Probably
because you would think that if that would be a far more productive. I mean, I think it's a complete waste of time for any vegan to focus on this. But if there was an AGM, you'd think that would be far more productive.
It may be that's coming, but you said they'd have to join the RSPCA to be able to attend the AGM.
Every single vegan that I've asked and spoken to that's basically took part in or promoted this most recent RSPCA campaign, when I've suggested that why don't they join the RSPCA, one of their local branches, and kind of take them down from the inside, they've laughed at that suggestion and said the same way that they'd never work hand in hand with a farmer. So,
you see, the thing is, two things there. First of all, I think joining the local branch, they'd have to join the RSPCA, the central RSPCA, because the branches are separate organisations, aren't they? And this is part of the problem we've seen with this campaign.
Each branch is a separate registered charity.
Each branch is a separate charity,
but not connected to the national.
There's a very, very tenuous connection. I think there was more of a connection at one time. I think the branches used to appoint the local inspectors, but they don't even do that now. And I think the only connection I think the branches they've received some financial help from the central RSPCA, but it's very small, and they have to fundraise 90% of the money they need themselves. There's very little connection between the RSPCA branches.
Yeah, there's an
And
interesting structure, because the national structure, the RSPCA, they're the ones who do the political campaigning and all that kind of stuff. Then you've got the
yeah,
regions, which are North, South, East, Midlands, and Wales. Now they're the ones who supervise the inspectorate.
yeah, they've got a different system now of appointing and managing the inspectors. I think it used to be more the local branches. The local branches now are really just involved in animal rescue and raising funds for animal rescue. And quite a few of them have rescue centres. And they operate, they will operate very, very differently. They're independent charities. So they're not only independent of a central RSPCA, they're also independent one from another. So they will operate very, very differently.
They do things like microchipping and that free, don't they, and that kind of stuff.
But yeah, they do stuff like that. Yeah, if they're able to raise enough funds, and nutrient spaying and stuff like that, and as I say, like fostering of, it's mainly dogs and cats, and some of them have rescue centres that they fundraise for themselves to build.
Okay, so let's pull together a couple of things. One thing that Andy said and one thing that you said, Ronnie, and we can go right back to 1835 for this. So this is before the RSPCA. This was when it was still not royal, right? And it was all focused on bear and bull baiting, as you said, Andy. And then there was also new laws to ban cruelty to dogs and domestic animals. And then also better legal standards are brought in at slaughterhouses. So this is right back to 1835. So that fits in what you were saying there, Ronnie, is the fact that they could ban bear and bull baiting because they were so unpopular. But all they could do in terms of slaughterhouses is try and regulate them. And essentially that's where they still are.
Oh yes, they still are. And you'll see their policies, as I said, with the greyhound racing. You see their policies change in line with sort of public opinion.
Like with the circuses, they regulated it, and then they got the exotic.
Yeah, I think that was probably the same. But they thought that the kind of the sort of climate of public opinion changed, so we now can go a bit further in what our demands are. I mean, we can call for abolition instead of regulation. This is kind of how they've operated all along.
Oh, but this as well, 1838, a guy called James Piper was an SPCA inspector. He was killed by cockfighting fans when he tried to stop a cockfight. So it was all pretty heavy in those days. This is just...
yeah, that doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me. I mean, of course, these things still go on. I mean, cockfighting still goes on. I think dog fighting still goes on as well. I mean, not as it did in those days, but these things still go on the quiet, don't they?
Yeah, bullfighting ends in 1870, and again you've got kind of you've got RSPCA inspectors and some police officers kind of stopping that. So yeah. I think the relationship. And I don't know much about this. You probably know more, Ronnie. The relationship between the RSPCA and the police is probably complicated, but also a lot of people think that the RSPCA have got police powers, which isn't true, is it?
No, I think they've just got the powers of an ordinary citizen.
Yeah, they've got the same powers that we've got. The only real thing that they've got in their corner is money, and obviously an already in place legal team.
Well,
but no, you actually find if you're ever stuck in a situation where, let's just say, you've got someone who is illegally trespassing and they're using their animals, you will get that the police and the RSPCA will keep deferring between one another because there's both aspects are covered, but they don't actually know who's got jurisdiction. The police don't want to deal with the animal side of things, and the RSPCA don't want to get involved in any of the non-human animal side of things. So it's a complicated situation, and sometimes, as much as I don't have great feelings about the RSPCA, I can understand why in a lot of situations their hands are completely tied, because they can only kind of use the legislation and law that exists already. They can't make it up. And so if it doesn't exist, or for example, MBR is quite a good example of this. So if you were to ring the RSPCA on the dogs that are used for security walking around the site saying they haven't got access to food and water, the RSPCA would come out. But if you had video footage that evidenced exactly the same claim about the beagles, the RSPCA have got zero power to act. So even though they might have the best of intentions, there's nothing they can do because the legislation protects the exploiters.
There's legislation that exempts the dogs.
So I think sometimes they get a lot of shit for things that they haven't even necessarily got the power to change. They've got no special authority.
They're trying to
anyway.
wing it a little bit, though, Andy, in the sense that there's a guy called Chris Newman. He's the chairman of something called the Federation of Companion Animal Societies, which I've never heard of.
No.
And they suggest that the RSPCA adopted all the kind of different ranks of inspector, and they modelled it on the police. And he says this was an attempt to adopt police powers in the public imagination, he said. So you've got a chief inspector.
In that regard, you could say that has worked because a lot of people do have the assumption that they've got these special powers that they don't have.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I mean. And so
I would definitely agree that is kind of that idea of implanting it. That's definitely worked. The amount of people that just assume that the RSPCA can walk in and arrest people and they can't do any of those things.
No, at the same time, I don't think the RSPCA have necessarily got the amazing reputation that a lot of the new welfare groups are saying they've got.
No, I agree with that absolutely.
You know,
if you were to go and forget vegans for a moment, if you were to just do a circuit around like animal rescues, like companion animal rescues around the UK, and your kind of just survey was like, what's your opinion of the RSPCA? The results wouldn't be positive. They'd be overall negative. The people that deal with kind of what the RSPCA aren't doing, or at least how it's perceived, have not got a good opinion of them. They feel like they're doing their job for them day in, day out. So if you go within any of those kind of sectors, the opinion of the RSPCA is dreadful, and almost all of those people are eating and using animals. But they're not influenced by an RSPCA assured sticker in any way, shape or form because they've got no respect or trust in the RSPCA already.
Hey, this is interesting. Apparently, the RSPCA inspectors, they verbally caution members of the public, right? And they say things like, you do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you may later rely on in court, which obviously is what police say to them. And the Times challenged the RSPCA on this and said, look, you don't actually have these powers, do you? And apparently, a spokesperson for the RSPCA said, we would prefer you didn't publish that.
Yeah,
but of course, it's up to you.
Exactly, yeah. It's a big misconception, yeah, absolutely. They essentially use the Animal Welfare Act to prosecute people. The only difference between them, like I said, is the fact that it's got backing, i.e. they've already got a legal team in place, they already know the legislation back to front, and they've got the finances to take people to court and get a prosecution. But we could do that. This is why I often say, rather than vegans wasting their time trying to change everything about the RSPCA and somehow get them to kind of capitulate and go into a vegan organisation, why not just set up your own tomorrow? Because you can use the same legislation that they use and prosecute people if that's what you're looking to do. You can go to all these farms and say, using the Animal Welfare Act,
why didn't you go to the RSPCA? I mean, you could get some people, they could go into the RSPCA and do a citizen's arrest on the RSPCA staff and the CEO and all that. Take them to the cop shop and say that these people are part of the meat industry and that they're being found guilty of causing cruelty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's definitely nothing stopping us setting up a rival organisation that does have vegan ethics, if that's what people are trying to get the RSPCA to do. I don't know why they're wasting their time trying to get them to do something completely kind of...
A rival organisation like the Vegan Society, you mean?
Well, yeah, but I mean, so most vegans' assumption, right, is that the RSPCA promised to do X, and therefore their claim is hypocritical because they're actually doing Y. So they could have like a vegan version of the RSPCA if that's what they're trying to engineer the RSPCA to become. They could just create a new one and kind of like rival them. And if it's successful and if it works in the way that they seem to think it will...
Yeah, but they don't want to do that. They want the RSPCA to become more radical. So you've got New
Yeah,
welfare
but the
is trying to regulate the
RSPCA could
RSPCA.
become more radical, right? But they'd only become more radical around animal use because that's what all their principles are around. So
Well,
the
yeah.
only way that you're going to change that is to either get them to dissolve and start up again with new principles and a new foundation, or start a new one. And it just seems much easier, from what I can see, to start a new one, or just move on and realise that it's all welfare and not really our problem.
Yeah, we don't want to start a new one. I mean, there's enough new welfare groups already. In his first book, Ed Winters said this: the question remains, because he's got this weird section where he says the RSPCA is a paradoxical organisation, and that is not true.
Well, don't forget, before obviously the most recent pigment campaign, obviously that was led by Joey, huge amounts of this kind of misrepresentation that comes from vegans about the RSPCA has come from Ed's content, where he's kind of made this allegation that they make this promise that they're not keeping when it's kind of not what they're promising.
Well, it's kind of not an allegation then, is it? It's kind of like what he's done. He's pointed out what they do, and they don't hide what they do. I mean, obviously they try and put it into a good light, which is true. I mean, they are spin doctors. The RSPCA always have been. But he says this question remains: is the RSPCA genuinely interested in the prevention of cruelty to animals, or is it simply creating policies around social norms, even though those norms are in fact perpetuating cruelty to animals? And this, again, is exactly where the RSPCA are.
Yeah.
They are looking at social norms, and they're thinking, well, look, we might be able to get exotic animals out of circuses, but we're not going to end the meat trade. So the only thing we can do then is create these policies around social norms, which is within a meat-eating society. We don't have a nation of animal lovers. We've got a nation of animal eaters. And that's what the RSPCA are trying to do something about. Not stop them eating it, but try and stop the cruelty or
unless the demand changes, then they're going to be trapped within this thing where they either do nothing or they do something which is never going to be good enough. I mean, you could look at like exportation as an example of this. So like it was campaigned against for decades before it was actually granted. And in fact, what it was really waiting for wasn't necessarily just the general public to kind of be opposed to it, because most people still don't care. Actually, what really needed to happen was many of these countries that were importing to set up their own systems, and now they don't need our exports. That's what really waited before we made any changes. We didn't have any reliance on it anymore for an income, and there wasn't that demand from other countries. That's the real reason that it was kind of like ended. It wouldn't have been in the best interests of other animals, because otherwise we wouldn't be breeding and exploiting them in the UK.
And what role does Brexit play?
I don't actually 100% know, but I know definitely from the little bits that I've read, almost all of these countries that once upon a time were heavily reliant on us for importation now kind of are self-sufficient or import from somewhere cheaper. So it wasn't kind of like, oh, we better do that because of the animals. It was more like, oh, there's not really a lot in this for us. We'll give them that. Just as Ronnie said earlier, like the things that there's not a lot of kind of pushback against, they can look to abolish those because there's a kind of like easy victories. But the things that the vast majority of the public are taking part in, they haven't got any chance of changing that mindset.
What happened with Brexit was that when the UK was part of the EU, they had to go along with the general EU laws regarding live exports, which was that they were permitted. And I think the only way that the UK could stop doing live exports or make it illegal would be for it to be changed within the EU. So Brexit enabled the UK to no longer be bound by the EU regulations on it, and so the UK was able to go it alone and ban certain live exports, because it's certainly not all live exports that have been banned. But of course, all that will happen now is that those countries that were importing the live animals from the UK will now import them from other countries instead. So it hasn't resulted in any in a kind of net.
Yeah,
spirit
the demand
price.
that requests those products hasn't been challenged in any way, shape, or form.
Well, no,
It's just the
not at all, no.
location that they're
It's
sourced
just
from
moved
that's changed.
it's moved the problem around. So it's like, okay, so animals bred and reared in the UK aren't going to be sent on long journeys to other countries. For the most part, some still will be, because it doesn't cover all animals.
Yeah, and actually potentially even from like a welfarist point of view, and I've made this point a few times, like we don't know what that has changed to. So let's just say, for argument's sake, like Holland was once upon a time quite a big importer of British pig, right? Well, now that they potentially get their pig from somewhere else, well, how do we know that that's not a twice as long journey? How do we know that those pigs aren't coming from, say, Lithuania, and they've got to travel across half of Europe to get there?
We don't. And the downside of it is that everyone's hailing this as a wonderful result of Brexit. But you see, the live export trade still exists, throughout the EU, and lots of EU countries export live animals to other countries, very often where they have to undertake long journeys. And now that the UK is no longer part of the EU, UK can't do anything about that. The UK no longer has a voice at the table in the EU to actually try to put an end to this on an EU-wide basis, if you see what I mean. So
no, that's a good point as well. Yeah, especially as obviously we're quite often heralded as having this fantastic welfare in the UK, and being a nation of animals.
It's one of these many victories that we have heralded within the kind of animal advocacy movement. You could say that when you look at it, isn't a victory at all.
No.
Well, they've got to get their money from somewhere. I was saying that the RSPCA are good spin doctors. Their response to the open letter, it's really clever the way that they've used the same language as the new welfarists. They said, we have worked together with you, our fellow campaigners and animal lovers, in the sector and beyond, to end barren battery cages. So that was a ban battery cages campaign, and then it ended up being barren battery cages, because that's what it's like. It's like, all the goalposts keep getting moved. Sow stalls for pigs, veal crates for calves. Together, we've introduced CCTV cameras in all slaughterhouses, which was an animal aid thing. We continue to campaign to end the use of cages in farming, for imports of foie gras to be banned. And so there's some things, like they're saying here, the only thing that they're talking about a ban here is foie gras, because they know that again is unpopular.
Yes, it's achievable.
Yeah, it's achievable.
I mean, what
it's
percentage realistically of the UK consume foie gras?
Well, the production of foie gras in the UK is already effectively illegal.
Yeah, they talk about the import of it.
Mm-hmm. But the import of it is still allowed, and of course it's still served in quite a number of restaurants. It's very similar to the situation with fur farming. The fur farming ban, but fur.
Yeah, and wasn't there? Correct me if I'm wrong here, but didn't we ban live lobsters, and then that got repealed as well?
Can't really remember.
I remember it being banned, and then I've got a feeling it was kind of like revoked, and in certain ways you were allowed now to still do it. I can't remember what the specific legislation was, but I know that quite often when these changes are made, which is a point we've made a few times in the past, that unless you're changing the mentality of the people around, those changes won't last anyway. Even if we could somehow magic in like a vegan government right now, without changing half the country to vegans, that government would last 4 years, and any changes that they brought in would just be changed the next time that the government's replaced. So there'd be no longevity there.
So they say, again, this is their response to the open letter, that animal welfare is hard and farmed animal welfare is even harder. Now, that obviously, I think we'd all agree, is completely true. I mean, everybody kind of knows that, right?
Yeah,
they
I
go
mean,
on to say
you
that
could potentially
we've got
argue that farmed animal welfare is almost impossible with the demand that exists right now.
well, they go on to say that. They say the reality we are grappling with is that 94% of people currently choose to eat meat. So there are billions of animals being farmed right now, often in appalling conditions, with little regard to their welfare. And so basically, they're saying that although their assured scheme is pretty shite, and although it's been kind of, they've kind of been caught with their pants down, that if they cancelled it, things would be worse, right? And so I'm still not quite sure what the vegan campaigners are wanting the RSPCA to do. They want them to stop trying to bring the cruelty down, and then what? Sign the plant-based thing, become a vegan organisation. All the kind of things that they're not going to do.
It's not even just that they're not going to do. I mean, it's kind of almost impossible for them to just turn into a vegan organisation. Like I've mentioned this a few times. People just seem to forget how broad of a kind of, I don't know, a coverage that the RSPCA have. Like
they could do it, and it just means that they lose all their members and everything.
Yeah, can you? I mean, so let's just say that we get our way, or the vegans' way. And the RSPCA from tomorrow rebrand. They're now a vegan organisation that's going to look to abolish animal use in all forms. They are a vegan organisation as we want them to be. Well, they've just lost probably 80% of their membership and their donations because none of those people give a fuck about vegans. If they did, they'd all be donating to what we call our vegan organisations now. And they're not because they don't care. So we need to change the mindsets of people before that organisation could even exist. But it's not possible. They cannot change to a vegan organisation because they haven't got vegan ethics. They'd have to just basically dissolve and start again.
It comes back to the fundamental argument that because of the reputation of the RSPCA, and we've already seen how the public have been a bit fooled that they're actually put part and parcel of the police, which they're not. So the argument is that they've got such a brilliant reputation that their labelling continues for people to continue, eating products derived from our fellow animals. And the suggestion then is that without those labels, people will stop consuming. And some people think that people will go vegan without an RSPCA label on their food. Now, I tend to think that's pretty fanciful myself.
So do I, but let's just go back to what we've kind of ascertained so far during this conversation. So let's just say, for argument's sake, the RSPCA's reputation at the moment is vast and brilliant. It's almost perfect. No one's got a bad word to say about them. And so from tomorrow, they delete and remove all RSPCA assured schemes and packaging and branding. All those stickers, everything gone, right? Well, what we've seen from the RSPCA is if they can get something to that kind of crunching point where more people are against it than are for it, they'll abolish it. So the evidence suggests that if the RSPCA could get the vast majority of people to stop eating animal products, they would use their authority, if you want to call it that, to abolish the eating of animals, just like they've abolished bull baiting, for example, because it would become a realistic goal. So actually, if vegans genuinely believe that the RSPCA are capable of having this much change on the public's opinion, then we should also rely on the RSPCA to just kind of give it that one last push, because that's what the evidence says that they do.
I'm not sure, though, that that's exactly what the campaigners are saying. I mean, there seems to be two strands to the campaign. One is that they want the RSPCA to drop the assured scheme. And in a sense, that's got similarities to the, the campaign to get the RSPCA to become opposed to hunting, because I think what the campaigners, the thinking of the campaigners is that because the RSPCA is giving its assured label to these farms, that is encouraging people to buy animal products. I think that's one aspect of it, and I think they're saying because the RSPCA is against cruelty, why is it giving its assured label to farms where cruelty occurs? I think that's that's the kind of first kind of aspect of the campaign, and the second aspect, certainly as far as Animal Rising are concerned, is they want the RSPCA to promote, support, encourage a transition to plant-based agriculture. I don't think there's anything in there about wanting the RSPCA to become a vegan organisation. In fact, with Animal Rising, they're not going to mention veganism or any encouragement of veganism because that's against their ideology, isn't it, to do so?
Well, that's the most realistic part of the campaign, isn't it? To get them to put their weight behind that transition.
I think that, I mean, nobody, whether it's the RSPCA or any organisation, should be giving any seal of approval to any animal farm, no matter what the conditions are.
Well, that's the basis of the scheme, though, Ronnie.
Yeah, that's it. You see, so and the second part of it, yes, the second part of it, I feel is kind of more positive. Of course, if the RSPCA were to speak up for a transition to plant-based agriculture, then yes, I mean that would be very, very helpful.
But you see, you can have that campaign without having a campaign to bring down the assured scheme, because essentially, it's like the vegans are saying. I mean, if the RSPCA are telling the truth, just say if they're telling the truth. And that if they do get rid of the assured scheme, which is, I think it covers several thousand farms, and I know it's not very good and they don't have much great inspection, and the inspection doesn't seem to be working too well, but they're claiming that if they end the scheme, which is the only one that's going, as it were, because the red tractor is even worse, if they end it, the cruelty will increase. And so they're basically saying to the vegans, is that what you want? You want the cruelty to increase for some political end?
I think that I think there could be thinking behind the campaign that through the RSPCA endorsing or giving its assured label to these farms, it's somehow encouraging people to consume animal products. In other words, there are people who consume animal products.
Yeah, but they're gonna say they know that people are consuming animal products, but so then their scheme is to point those people who won't stop consuming animal products or haven't stopped consuming animal products, the vast majority, 94%, they say, well, we're giving you a higher welfare place to go to.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the RSPCA's response.
Yeah.
The campaigners would say, I think in the campaign, in the imagination of the campaigners, there may be some people who, think, well, we're buying the highest welfare animal products we can from these RSPCA assured farms, and now these farms have been exposed as, as cruel. And so, therefore, those people will now stop consuming animal products altogether. I think that's kind of hope that's coming from the exposés. But also that if the RSPCA dropped the assured scheme, and those people who currently buy RSPCA assured animal products could no longer buy them, that those people would somehow magically switch to a plant-based diet. And I think it's very, I don't really see that happening, because I don't think, I think what happens is you've got to look at the psychology of someone that, say, goes into the supermarket and opts for products that's RSPCA assured. I mean, what is there? Say you're talking about, say, just beef, for example. They're going in the supermarket. They want to buy some beef, right? They say, I want to buy some beef, and I'm going to go for the RSPCA assured beef. If there's no RSPCA assured beef, is it really the case that those people are not going to buy any beef at all, or are they going to look around for the next best? And I think overwhelmingly, in the vast majority of cases, they're still going to buy beef. They're just going to look for something that's got another kind of label on it to
like all of the main supermarkets in this country, so Sainsbury's, Tesco, Asda, Morrison's, all of them have got their own kind of production system as well as what they import or bring in from other places. So although they're not farms, as people want to imagine them as farms, like free-range farms, they're factory farms, they're essentially owned by the supermarkets. And so they don't need the RSPCA's label. They can just call it Tesco High Welfare. And that's not being challenged by the RSPCA changing their branding.
That's overwhelmingly what people would do, because
those gaps would genuinely. Do you think Tesco would look at their meat aisles all of a sudden, just see straw rolling across the floor? Or do you think they're going, hang on a minute, we need to put a different sticker on this? If it genuinely is a sticker.
But hang on, Matt. I mean, you both can't say what you just said because we don't know. I mean, like the vegan campaigners don't know what the public will do if the RSPCA labels go. And it seems to me that if there's a possibility, just a possibility, that the cruelty will go up, because these new welfarists are obviously interested in cruelty levels. Because it's the only thing they ever really talk about. So if the cruelty goes up and there's a risk of that, why would they risk that if they haven't got the research to know what the public are going to do by bringing down this scheme? So it seems to be a bit arseways. They don't know what the public are going to do. They're just assuming. In the same way as...
You're right that we don't know potentially what the public are going to do in this particular situation. But we can look at other situations where things have changed to make it a little bit more difficult for the consumer, say, and has it drastically affected things? So let's just look at tobacco, for example, or alcohol, and the price rises every single April in the budget. And yet do people still buy alcohol and tobacco? Yeah, of course they do. So what this shows us is that even when things get more difficult for people, if they want to do something, they're going to do it. So you're going to need to change the mindset, and that's not being changed by product or packaging change. Like, you're going to have to get a bit deeper than that. Because, I mean, look at football tickets. Look at the price of people going to watch football. It's an absolutely ridiculous price. People still go. They still sell out the games week in, week out. Because people want to do those things. And they will find a way to do those things until someone changes their mind about doing those things, not just how they do them. And that's not being challenged by taking a sticker away from a product. I mean, let's just say it does work in the way that some of these vegans think it does and predict it does. Well, all we're going to create is vegetarians, because the RSPCA don't assure dairy or eggs. Well, they do eggs, sorry, but no, they don't assure dairy. They don't assure any other animal use. And so if that's what it relies on, that sticker, then all we'll be doing is cutting down people's meat consumption. They'll still be using animals in all the other ways. Then what?
See, I think if we ask the question, why does animal farming exist? Why does animal farming exist? And why does all this, this cruelty and these poor conditions that exist within animal farming, why does all of that go on? The reason it goes on is because humans consume animal products. Right? That's the reason it goes on. It doesn't go on because it doesn't exist because of the RSPCA assured scheme. It exists because people consume animal products. So what you have to do is change that. What you've got to do is educate people to no longer consume animal products. If you want to put an end to animal farming, right? And so, for me, my main problem with this whole campaign is that I feel it's a misuse. It's not the best use of the resources of vegans and vegan campaigners. It's not, so much effort's been put into this, so much money's been put into,
Yeah, but these vegans are new welfare, so they're bound to take an interest with what the RSPCA do.
And I think that the reason why they're new welfare is because they haven't actually analysed the situation properly. Because if you're wanting to encourage, persuade, educate people not to consume animal products, so that the whole reason for animal farming disappears, then what you have to do is focus on vegan outreach. You've got to focus on vegan outreach, not in campaigning against the RSPCA. And so this is this is diversion. It's a diversion of the resources of our movement away from what people should really be doing.
We've got an entire bloody history of it, Ronnie.
A whole history. And you see the exposés, all these farms that are visited, and the video footage and all these exposés that were done by Animal Rising, and there's been exposés done by Animal Justice Project and Jerry Carbstrong and probably other people as well. That those exposés, and whether you needed to have as many as that, I'm quite sure. I'm quite sure not. Could have been used to draw attention, to say to people, look, these farms are meant to be high welfare, and this is what's happening. But you have to also say, even if this wasn't happening, and even if these animals were kept in good conditions, then it's still wrong, because those animals are still being exploited, they're still being used, and at the end of the day, they're all going to be killed, for human purposes, when that is quite unnecessary. And that could have been the message put forward as part of the vegan outreach effort. But instead it wasn't. That, all that work, all that, all that exposing has been used to try to persuade the RSPCA to drop the assured scheme. Hasn't been used to promote veganism. And on the other aspect of it, the idea of getting the RSPCA to campaign for a plant-based future, plant-based agriculture. Yeah, it'd be great if the RSPCA were to do that. But what are the chances of them being persuaded to do that? And once again, all that effort being put into that, wouldn't that be better put into vegan outreach as well?
Yeah, but it's always the same. It's the same answer, isn't it? I mean, we need more vegan outreach, and this is taking vegans away from vegan outreach.
Taking vegans away. I mean, these people are campaigners that are going outside the RSPCA HQ and, sort of mistakenly going outside the charity shops run by the local branches, which
are not connected to the RSPCA.
Not connected to the RSPCA or the assured scheme.
And quite often on their Saturdays aren't even attended in terms of there's no one even there. It's an empty building with a security guard, so they're shouting at basically a building.
Well, yeah, and possibly harming the fundraising efforts of the charity shops, which are there to raise money for the Western.
Let's go back to the labels, and also it's gone 10, so we can take questions if people want to ask them now. But there was some really interesting research which was put out in 2023, so that's not very long ago. It's by somebody called Molly Elizabeth Harrison, and she's got a degree in veterinary science from the University of Bristol, and she's now at Belfast University, I think. So the paper that I'm talking about is called Factors Influencing Consumer Purchase of Higher Welfare Assured Pig Meat Products in Ireland and the UK. So what she does is she interviews lots of people, hundreds, a couple of thousand, I think, more than that. And she ends up by putting them into clusters. The first one is called the indifferent cluster. There's another one which is like labels cluster, and there's one that is pro pig welfare. And so the indifferent clusters, in other words, people who don't really give a shite about labels or not, that's almost 70% of people, 68%. So that tells you that 68% of people going into supermarkets after the RSPCA drop their label they're not even going to notice because they're completely indifferent. The ones that like labels, it doesn't necessarily say which ones they like more than others, because this paper is actually aimed at the industry, how to sell your so-called pork, right? And they say that there is 23% of people who say that they like labels. But that just means then you've got to come up with a label that they like, and then they'll be happy. So we're already into 80, almost 90% kind of thing. And then you've got another cluster which is called pro pig welfare. That's just 9%. But this is pig welfare as well. So that doesn't mean that they're not going to eat pigs. It's just that they're really interested. That they're animal and environmental lovers and this kind of stuff. They're interested in labels. Now, those are the ones who might take notice if the label changed. So they might check it out, they might do. But the vast majority of people are not going to do it, according to this research. So again, where does that leave us? All this diversion from campaigning against veganism for something that most people are not going to really register.
You see, I think one of the sort of driving forces behind this campaign and the reason kind of why it exists is because of this prevalence of the word cruelty and kind of using cruelty as the basis for everything. In other words, the kind of argument goes that all animal farming is cruel, and so therefore that's why people should go vegan, because it's impossible to avoid cruelty in animal farming, right?
Yeah, and I mean, just quickly, what do you think the general public kind of, I don't know, I suppose, perceive when they read something like, we surveyed 200 farms and found that 44 violated the Animal Welfare Act? Well, from their mind, they think, well, there's 150 plus that are okay. You didn't say they're all violating rights. You made out that 44 of them are a problem, which automatically means that the rest, the remainder, which is the majority, are okay. Even if that's not what you're saying, that's what's perceived.
Yeah, I think some people will, where people are desperately trying to cling on to an excuse to carry on consuming animal products. Of course, they are gonna look at it that way round. But you see, the problem is that if your argument for veganism is based on cruelty, the reason to go vegan is because, or the reason not to consume animal products is because animal farming is always cruel, right? Then what you've got to do is you've got constantly be proving that all the time, because you're going to get animal farmers saying, well, we're not cruel. We treat our animals in these, really well. They're kept in really good conditions. And hey, look, we're a part of this assured scheme, or we're a part of this red tractor scheme, or we're a part of this other scheme that guarantees high welfare. You see, and so because the campaigners want to maintain this idea of all animal farming being inevitably cruel, they then have to prove that that's wrong. They then have to prove that all these so-called high welfare farms aren't high welfare at all. And so there has to be this endless series of investigations to prove that.
Yeah, but then we're back to Ed's quote where he's talking about social norms, because the public and the vegans don't see the word cruelty in the same way. So, the fact is, we're saying oh, animal farming is cruel. And that means things like, well, it involves slaughter and this kind of stuff. Well, that doesn't cut it. That doesn't cut it with the public, because the social norm about cruelty is like, kicking the shit out of other animals and stuff, not slaughtering them. So we've got this cultural task, which is vegan education. So again, it's all been diverted away from our number one target, cultural speciesism, as usual. It's always the bloody same.
Well, yes, because if you say that the basis for our objection, to animal farming is the exploitation of these animals, the use of those animals, for the purposes of humans, and also the fact that they're all going to be inevitably killed anyway, as part of that use. That applies to all animal farming. The farmers can't then try and can't get out of that that they can constantly try to get out of accusations of cruelty or ill treatment of the animals. But they can't get out of the fact that those animals are exploited and killed. That's inevitable in all farming. So if that's the basis of the argument for veganism, it's unassailable. So that's what vegans should be using as the basis of the argument.
Isn't it ultimately something to do with using words that the public understand and try to say, well, it's all cruel. So, what you think is not cruel actually is cruel. Killing them is cruel. Farming them in the first place is cruel, and all this. So you've got to have a cultural conversation with them to change the public perception of what cruelty means. Because right now, within cultural speciesism, cruelty doesn't mean what vegans say it means. It means a lot less than that.
Yeah, cruelty literally means unnecessary abuse to the general public, whereas to vegans it basically means any rights violation. But those things don't compute because the general public haven't had that memo.
But we don't need to go there.
No, I know, we really don't. I mean, I think it's much harder work to try and change the public's mind about a word than it is to just use different language.
Yeah, I mean, I never use the word cruelty in outreach.
Nor do I. I never ever talk about that word.
No, I talk about the fact that the animals have been exploited and killed, and we don't need to do it in order to survive, so therefore it must be wrong. How can it be justified? It can't be, can it? And that's it. End of story, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, except the problem is, because we've got cultural speciesism and the main plank of that is animal welfareism, then animal use is not a problem unless that animal use is cruel. Mm-hmm. And so that sets up the argument then between the vegans and society, because the vegans are saying it's all cruel, and the cultural speciesists have been told that non-cruel use is not only feasible and possible, it's actually the norm.
Yeah. And then potentially we've also got the kind of limitations placed on the RSPCA, even if they do want change, by things like the Animal Welfare Act. So there's no, even if the RSPCA wanted to turn around and say something like dehorning was cruel, well, it's okay. It's part of the process. It's kind of excluded and exempt from the aspects of cruelty. So they'd have a real challenge on their hand to prosecute anyone for something that's not technically illegal. So you'd have to change the mindset first. And the easiest way to do that over and over again is to create vegans. If we created a lot more vegans, the RSPCA's job would get easier. Their burden would get less. I mean, I would kind of argue that they're 94%. I think that's possibly a little bit high. But even using their percentage, what they're basically telling us is, look at this overwhelming demand. Unless that changes some way, shape or form and balances out, what the fuck can we do? Because there's more animals every week being demanded. So if you want us to pull out, who's going to do this? And there isn't anyone. No one will. So they might not be doing their job properly, but that's because they don't have the numbers or the resources to adequately cover the sheer amount of animals that are being used. And that's only going to get worse, not better, until we shift the mindset of people, until we create more vegans.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. But you see, I'm wondering if another reason for this campaign may be a financial one. In that, I mean, these organisations that are
What the assured scheme or the
no, the
You
campaign.
mean from the vegans' point of view?
Yes, from the
Yeah. Well, I mean, without making accusations, so there's a big donate now button underneath that page that I listed earlier, and I'm like, well, what are you raising money for?
Yeah, you see, the thing is that basically you've got you've got a number of organisations that are kind of become involved in this campaign, and probably the main players are Animal Rising, and then
somebody asked before who they were. They didn't know who Animal Rising was.
Ah, right. Well, Animal Rising, Animal Rising started as a group called Animal Rebellion. And Animal Rebellion came out of Extinction Rebellion. And Extinction Rebellion was set up a few years ago to use direct action, civil disobedience, civil disruptive tactics.
Roger Hallam is in prison now, isn't
he? Well, yes, for the Just Stop Oil protests. For blocking the M25. And he is one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion. What happened was Extinction Rebellion, it was campaigning. It's to do with the climate crisis and to do with, using disruptive tactics to, put pressure on governments to bring in effective measures to combat the climate crisis.
But if you go back to Extinction Rebellion, Ronnie, they really had the same position as the RSPCA. They wanted everybody to get on board, including the farmers, didn't they? And that's what created the split, wasn't it?
Yeah. I think what happened was there was the emphasis of Extinction Rebellion was very much on fossil fuels, whereas, of course, animal agriculture and also to a certain extent the fishing industry makes a huge contribution to the climate crisis, and it's been argued that it's actually the number one contribution. By some organisations have produced reports that that indicate that, and so there was a group split away, called themselves Animal Rebellion, and they were going to use similar tactics to Extinction Rebellion, but to concentrate on the on the farming and fishing industries, and basically that's what they started doing. They kind of they blockaded. McDonald's depots, and they blockaded dairy distribution centres in order to kind of cause a stir. The idea to put pressure on the government to kind of move the country towards a plant-based future. Replace animal agriculture with plant-based agriculture. And but the main problem I always had with them was that they never promoted veganism. Ideologically are opposed with kind of putting any responsibility on the individual to make changes. It's all about system change rather than individual change. And I always argued that you can't have system change without individual change. So individual change is vitally important. Anyway, but then what happened was some members of Animal Rebellion, they, under a separate name, they carried out a raid on the MBR Acres dog breeding facility that breeds beagles for animal experimentation in Cambridgeshire, because this is, this was kind of very, very high profile within the animal rights movement at the time, and, to a large extent still is. And they rescued some beagles from there, and that action was extremely popular. And I think they thought, aye, this is, and they got lots of, donations from it. And I think they thought, hang on a minute, this is, maybe we ought to kind of make this more of a thing, and include that sort of action in what we do. But we can't do that under the name of Animal Rebellion because that's really just to do with animal agriculture. So they changed the name to Animal Rising to broaden their remit, to broaden the range of targets they could take action against, and those are targets for anything to do with what they considered to be cruelty to.
What am I right in thinking, Ronnie, that even before Extinction Rebellion, were they not Extinction Rising?
No,
No.
I don't think so. No. And so then they tried to disrupt the Grand National, didn't they? And the Epsom Derby and the Greyhound Derby. And,
Well, they made a whole bunch of promises about direct action that they didn't really fulfill. But yeah.
And so, but there's still a big aspect of their campaign is to do with the food industry and animal farming, and this is where the RSPCA thing has come in. But you see, with them and the Animal Justice Project, who are the other main player in this RSPCA campaign. See, these organisations, the prime aim of these organisations, and they they may not admit it, but the prime aim of these organisations has to be to raise money, because they have employed staff. I don't know whether they have officers, but they have, they have employees. They've got a number of people that need to have their wages paid and all that kind of thing. Right. So their number one priority, and it's the same, I think, with all these kind of national organisations. Their number one priority has to be to do things that bring money in.
Yeah.
Hasn't it? Because otherwise they're no longer going to exist. They're in a situation where they have to do that, aren't they? Otherwise, then they're not people just working on the dole like Gandhi we used to do back in the day, and and stuff like that. They've got to bring the money in. So everything has to be a major priority in everything they decide to do. Right. So they're kind of thinking all the time on campaigns. Is this going to bring in donations? Is this going to bring money in order for us to survive as an organisation, to pay the wages and all that? And of course, with the RSPCA campaign, you see, the thing is, you have a campaign. You have a campaign for veganism. That's just one campaign. It's one campaign, and it's a long campaign. It's the same thing all the time, isn't it? Right? Whereas you have a campaign, and it's long term, isn't it? You have a campaign like this. We want the RSPCA to drop the assured scheme. We want the RSPCA to kind of advocate for a plant-based future. Right. Now, that's a kind of, that in a sense can be seen as an achievable aim. Whether it's not achievable or not, who knows? But it's a much more short-term aim that people can more relate to. And so that's likely to bring in the donations, isn't it? When it's coupled with all the emotional stuff about, look at this terrible cruelty that the RSPCA is supporting them, aren't they? Terrible people, and, we need to kind of go outside their headquarters and shout and campaign and all that and send us money. So there's that. And also what you can do is claim short-term victories, can't you, which they've already done. When the RSPCA say this big thing about the RSPCA has removed the meat menus from its website. Now, I don't know whether they did or not, or whether there was meat menus on there anyway, but that was claimed as a victory. And then the RSPCA cancelled some big celebration, didn't they, because they were worried about demonstrations just recently. The fact that the RSPCA, that was claimed as a victory. Or what a great victory. We've had a victory against the RSPCA. Send us money. Send us donations.
Yeah, I imagine if anybody wants to learn how to make a so-called beef casserole, they go to the RSPCA website to find it out. But
yeah, I mean that's what I said when they first announced that.
Yeah,
that means absolutely
we
nothing.
get near the end, so I'd like your gents' response to this, because I get the impression that the RSPCA, if we could be a fly on the wall at the RSPCA headquarters, they would probably think that the the vegans who are running this new welfare campaign are at best naive and at worst a bit dim, because they say we know we need to do more and we want to do more, which is why we're continually updating our standards to drive up welfare for animals, not just in the UK, but around the world. Our standards have pulled the rest of the industry with us. If we step back from this now, we let the rest of the industry off the hook, and it risks a race to the bottom for farmed animal welfare. So that's one thing. And then the second thing they talk about is that, we talk about, your scheme is not very good, the standards are not very high, and, the inspections are not good. They report, and whether this is true or not, I don't know, they report that within 5 years, they had a number of what they call duck members of the RSPCA assured scheme. They said that 50% of duck so-called producers were part of the RSPCA scheme. But within 5 years, they'd all left. And the reason they left is that the welfare standards were too high. And so they've got this balancing act to do. They've got to try to increase the welfare without, first of all, by getting the farmers on board, and then without doing things that are going to get them to leave. So they've got a terribly, terribly difficult job within the remit of being traditional animal welfareists. And it seems to me that the vegans who are running this new welfare campaign don't seem to have any appreciation about what the RSPCA are about or what they're trying to do and how difficult it is.
I don't think they do, but my big question is, why have the vegans gone there anyway? Why have the vegans gone there anyway? Just let the RSPCA get on with it, and the vegans concentrate on vegan outreach. And if you want to use some footage from an RSPCA farm to say, look, this is how the animals are treated, but by the way, the fundamental wrong isn't this, but it's that they're used in the first place. You want to use that kind of language, fine. But don't get involved with the RSPCA anymore.
Well, I totally agree with that.
Yes.
We went into a farm. We found this. These are terrible rights violations. And right at the end, by the way, this is an RSPCA assured thing. But no, they put that bit at the front of it because they're new welfareists.
Well, the thing is that like, it's not. This isn't where our focus should be. Not on the RSPCA. Our focus should be on the ordinary public. Is getting out there, educating people to become vegan. In the street at community events online where we can do it online, whatever. That is what the focus of all vegans should be, and that is the focus of what all vegan campaigners should be. That's the way forward. And kind of welfare comes from that anyway, because you get more and more people refusing to consume animal products. Then the industry will desperately want to do something about that. Will kind of desperately want to try and kind of stop people from doing that. Now the industry isn't going to stop producing animal products, but what they'll try to do is bring in welfare measures. Say, look, we're okay. We brought in these welfare measures. We've got better conditions for the animals. Carry on consuming our products. That's what they'll do. So you get welfare. Not that we're asking for welfare. We're asking for abolition. But through campaigning for abolition, you get welfare as a desperate response from the industry that is under pressure.
The final thing for me is that the RSPCA are quite cunning, really. They're quite good at spin doctoring, and they're quite good at what they do. In the sense that you got to kind of appreciate this, because they end their response to the open letter by saying, setting ourselves against each other means that there are no winners. But that's because they recognise that the people who are shouting and screaming at them are also welfareists. If they thought that the people outside their door were abolitionist vegans, they've got nothing to say to each other, because these things have got nothing to do with each other.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. And the letter even potentially, in the newspaper, was it the Times? It literally described them as animal welfare organisations, and that includes the
Well,
likes
they
of
just
Jenny
look at the
Parker.
language they use, don't they, Andy? And then say, well,
Yeah,
these are welfarists.
absolutely, yeah. That's why the RSPCA addressed it, saying, we basically want the same thing, we're on the same side, because that's what they
If a
see.
journalist looks at the RSPCA website and then they look at all the things that the influencers and the national groups say, and the language is exactly the same, what is that journalist supposed to conclude?
Exactly. And obviously, what a perfect opportunity would have been after those few news articles kind of alluding to their open letter, that Joey and a few of the others said, well, hang on a minute, we've been called welfarists here. I'm not happy with that. No one said a word. So it just cements that idea in the public's mind, who have already got this idea anyway.
Well, it's like one group of welfarists saying that another group of welfarists aren't doing their job properly, isn't it?
Yeah.
Without
even offering a viable solution. You've not got the new welfarists that are going, well, we're going to do your job better than you. They're saying, we don't want to do your job. We're just going to moan at you about doing a better one.
Yeah, and then if they do a better one...
They're not saying, hang on a minute, how much more money do you need, or how much extra staff do you need to make sure that you're doing this properly? They're not saying those things. They want them to just give them up.
The weird thing is, though, Andy, is that if the RSPCA did their job better, then, according to the RSPCA, a lot of the farmers are just going to leave it.
I would agree with them, yeah.
And so
I would imagine that probably is the problem. Yeah, if you keep going in there and moaning at the farmers, I don't think that the RSPCA branding sells as many products as these schemes allude to. So yeah, just for example, to go back to what you mentioned with the duck farmers, surely the duck farmers, if the RSPCA's reputation is that strong and that important, then they couldn't bear to leave the scheme that they have, because it wasn't worthwhile.
Well, they couldn't meet the requirements because, and the requirements are not exactly,
this is what I mean. Surely, what if they would have just had to spend a few extra grand here or hire?
Yeah, they said the ducks should have access to water. They're fucking ducks.
Yeah, exactly. So we're talking about bare basics, and they didn't want to adhere to them, and instead they chose to leave. And I'm sure they're still selling their products. So look at all the research that does exist to us. So we've got 200 years of the RSPCA's existence. We've got the research that you talked about earlier, Roger, and we've got absolutely no data anywhere that if these products are changed, their packaging, that this is going to shift the public's opinion, because that doesn't exist. So what data are all the vegans using to kind of imagine that this is going to be the conclusion? What are they using to prop this up with?
No, I think it's YouTube clicks, I think.
See, one thing that concerns me is that you've kind of got, you've got the organisations that have organised this campaign. And of course, they've enrolled a lot of kind of ordinary grassroots vegans into this. Is that, for example, when, the thing, Animal Rising's campaign of having protests outside the RSPCA charity shops run by the local branches and that are used to fund rescue. And, Animal Rising say, right, we're going to have a campaign against these shops. These are all part of the RSPCA. We need to put pressure on the RSPCA. And of course, a lot of ordinary vegans just go along with that because they believe in what Animal Rising say and think, great, this is some action that I can get involved in. And so off they go outside the local charity shop. Creating a grave danger that shop is going to affect the money that those shops raise. But it's kind of not the fault of those vegans any more than they haven't thought for themselves, that they've just gone along with what some sort of national organisation has told them to do.
Yeah, and it falls back into the problem that you talk about all the time, Ronnie. This movement doesn't have enough organisers. And so if there is a national group that are willing to kind of organise something, like put on a protest or a campaign, and all you've got to do is kind of tag along, well, that's very easy for these people.
Everyone just joins in. And people don't think, there's no critical thinking or critical examination of, kind of the validity of what people are being asked to do. No. Because people don't want to think for themselves. Don't want to think for themselves and don't want to be autonomous. And so therefore they're just sucked into these things.
where they're used as pawns in a sense in a campaign that's highly questionable.
Yeah, but that creates a movement issue that we might be able to finish on. Maybe, I don't know. It's just that if you've got, the vegan influencers, Ed and Joey and all the rest of them, then the major groups, Viva, Animal Lovers, and all that kind of stuff. If they're gonna dip their toe all the time into welfarism, and they're almost like saying, well, this is what vegans do. I mean, the reason they're doing it is because they also are welfarists, as you said, Bonnie. But I mean, where does it? I mean, who's left? If all them are doing welfare and dipping their toe into the pond of welfare,
I think you've got what I call chimera organisations. I mean, Animal Rising are a very strange organisation, of which there never has been anything similar to them before. But if you take the kind of what you might call the more traditional sort of national groups, and there's more and more of them, sprung up, haven't they? Like Animal Justice Project is a relatively new group, and then there's a few others as well. And then you've got the older groups like Viva, and you've got even older groups like Animal Aid, PETA, for instance. Now, all those groups, I call them chimeras because on one hand they'll promote animal rights and anti-speciesism, even as PETA do. On the other hand, they run welfarist campaigns. And I think the reason they run the welfarist campaigns is because they're more likely to bring in donations.
Yeah. I mean, we're into the territory of Gary Francione, where he said they talk out of all sides of their fundraising mouths.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you see, so what happens is that they know that it's something that kind of, if we can have a campaign that gets this particular supermarket to no longer buy eggs from this particular egg supplier that's been shown to treat the chickens particularly harshly, and if we succeed in getting the supermarket to no longer buy eggs from that supplier, we can claim that as a big victory and send us loads of money. In fact, the reality is it makes no difference because all the supermarket does is get eggs from a different supplier. It makes no difference to the animals, and yet it brings in money. So it's why they do these campaigns. But it's a lot of it's to do with psychology of ordinary people, unfortunately.
Yeah, but so where do we go from here? If our analysis is sound or pretty good or whatever, what now in terms of the movement? If the entire vegan movement is being diverted into new welfarism, what are we going to do about it, or are we just going to accept it?
I think all we can do is keep on saying what we're saying, keep on trying to show people what. There's a very, very simple way forward to animal liberation, and that is we need loads more vegan outreach.
Yeah, but there's no point in having all those vegan outreaches talking about cruelty all the time.
No, and also you've got to, it's got to be the proper sort of vegan outreach, of course, so there's education to be done within the vegan community, in various ways. And all we can do is carry on doing that. There isn't any more we can do than that.
What about what I've started calling the vegan cherry on the top? That the idea that the new welfarists are saying, "Don't be cruel, go vegan." Do you think that it computes or what?
Well, it might compute vegans to what extent it kind of computes with the public, because ordinary people don't make that connection. They'll just say, "Well, look, I'm going to get my animal product from somewhere that's not cruel."
But they say they already do, don't they? I mean, everybody you meet on the street knows a free-range fucking butcher, don't they?
Yeah, of course they do.
Everyone's got an uncle or a local farm, or absolutely, yeah. So again, this plays back into the kind of like evidence stroke data. Even if Animal Rising or Animal Justice Project or anyone else could put forward and go, "Hey, look, here's a campaign where people shifted their perspective," people are dishonest. So they may well have answered a survey and said, yeah, I always buy the free-range eggs. But the reality is practicality dictates what they buy, and it'll be the cheapest, the easiest, and the most convenient.
In many cases, yeah, people are going to kind of
Yeah, well, on
movies.
that, we're back to the fact that I used to teach methodology, and one of the first things we said was, "Isn't it brilliant? You can ask human beings questions, and they can answer them. The only problem is they lie a lot."
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Especially when they're put on the spot about something that they don't usually think about. Yeah, they'll tell you what they think you want to hear.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why quite often, in fact, like obviously I can't speak for anyone else, but when I had my very first counselling appointment, that was kind of the myth that we debunked. He was like, look, there's no point you telling me what you think that I want to hear, because that's no benefit to you. That was the first kind of like hurdle, I suppose, was kind of getting past that myth. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes back to, remember that prison story I told you about, the fact that I was friends with a lot of lifers, and they were all fairly jolly and jokes, usual kind of lad banter and all that kind of stuff. But every now and again, when one of them was up for assessment, they all became very serious, and they were all kind of trying to work out what they thought the psychologist or psychiatrist, whoever they were, their assessor was going to ask. And then they were trying to work out if they were right about what they were going to ask, what is the right answer to that?
Yeah.
Right. Not what was the truth, but
exactly. Yeah. And you do find that with people when you kind of survey them in the street and stuff, that's why you get a lot of people that will tell you that they get their products from their uncle's farm, or they always make sure they do this, because they kind of are aware of these things going on. And it's probably the first time they've really thought about it. And so they're going to give the answer. I mean, and it shows how often we hear this as vegans when people kind of say, but I get it from this farm, as if that's going to go, no worries then, we'll leave you alone and go and speak to the next person. It's because they think we're welfareists. That's what they expect us to be.
And I'm sure they would love to do that. I mean, they would love to be actually doing what they say they're doing, but they're not.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that they're not, because the maths just physically don't work. But yet, everybody that you speak to, it's very, very, very seldom that you get a conversation with someone where they go, yeah, pretty much all the animals that I buy are factory farmed. That's probably true. No, everyone's always got some sort of get out of jail free card.
Hey, look at that, Ronnie. That's something from the past. Mini Monologues is talking about the Peace Pledge Union and the white poppy. That was real big in our day, wasn't it? Well, I think Ronnie's gone off to die somewhere with his voice.
We should be able to hear you.
I was on mute. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was a member of the PPU back in the day, when I was much more involved in the peace movement. Yes, it was a really
now
big
you do
thing.
the PPU in a different way.
Yeah,
PP poo now it is.
Yeah, and I was about to say, I think this is probably the cleanest show we'd ever had.
It's just started to go down now.
It's a big dump at the end. Yeah.
We can't be having that.
Well, I suppose we better go before it starts deteriorating, haven't we?
I was going to say, I don't think there's been any questions that we haven't seen. It's been quite a slow chat, so I think we've kind of covered everything that we wanted to cover.
Okay, people. So it looks like it's me and thee next week.
Yeah, that is right, Ronnie. You did say you won't be around next week.
Yeah, we're seeing some friends up in the northwest on.
There he goes again, pretending he's got friends. It's just like those people who pretend that they always buy free reign.
Yeah. Well, Louise has got loads of friends, and I just go with her, really.
You just get your on, yeah.
Do you have to sit outside in the car, Ronnie?
I'll sit outside of the car while she chats.
With him. Actually, you could do some flyering while you were there.
I'm like the chauffeur. I'm the chauffeur.
Not even.
Drives her around. Yeah.
Right. Well, on that note, yeah. So me and Roger will be back next Sunday, and then the three of us will be back the Sunday after as normal. And we finally might get to the 70s. So
Or the 60s even.
Yeah, we are going to definitely do the 60s next week. I think there's no way that we can squeeze something else in.
I didn't realise that everybody hates the 60s. What's going on?
It seems that way, doesn't it? Yeah, naturally everyone's anti the 60s.
When was the one when people wore the terrible clothes? That was the
70s.
70s with all the terrible.
I mean, did that ever start?
I mean, the 60s was peace, love, and rock and roll, man, and all that. But maybe that's because it all went sour or something.
So yeah, that I mean, that obviously we can bring that up next week when we're talking about it, but that was one of the things that I was actually quite interested in, whether the spirituality kind of shift within the vegan society was a sign of the times.
Yeah, well, Leslie Cross was pretty spiritual, wasn't
Yeah, but not to the same degree as, I mean, it does go a little bit kind of almost not. I mean, it would be, well, it's very spiritualistic for
he?
about
You talk
2
about
years.
Jack Sanderson and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. I mean, it really is very kind of like we're all connected and we've all got the soul of nature, and like it really is like that for a couple of years. So
Yeah, but
I was
it's a bit
wondering if that
weird,
was
though,
a
isn't it?
sign of like
Because-
what was going on.
Yeah, but throughout, I mean, they did mention it a couple of times, but they didn't go the American route to kind of ahimsa and stuff.
No, that's very true.
So, I mean, that would be an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah,
next week.
that definitely will actually. And obviously, there's that big gala night that's got Jay Dinser there and Eva Bat and stuff like that. So they obviously would have been well aware of his thoughts, and he was involved in the UK one before he formed the American one and that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, well, he came over to that banquet and that, didn't he?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okie dokie.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you with that teaser, and we'll be back next week to actually finally talk about veganism during the 60s. But yeah, thanks so much, chat. Thank you so much for joining me. And
Yeah, see you, Andy. See you, Ronnie.
See you later.
Yeah, see you, Ron. See you, Andrew.
Yeah, take
Bye.
care,
Take care.
mate.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, take care.